Okay, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome, everybody. I think I know most of you, but for those that don't know, my name is Sarah Lefton, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Philanthropy at UJA, overseeing the annual campaign. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. I understand there's a Raptors game on. I don't personally, I'm afraid to admit it, but if you're on the call, then you also aren't watching the Raptors, so I don't feel that bad. I don't watch, but I understand that's a very big deal if the Raptors are on. It's also a big deal because it's the first week of school for many of us who have kids and grandkids. And so, if you have kids or grandchildren who are back at school this week, I hope it's been a really smooth transition back. My daughter, went today for the first day since March, like everybody else. And it was just phenomenal to see the smile on her face as she went to school this morning and even as she came home, which was even better. So really, really thrilled. Tonight, this is the first of a series of 3 programs that we will be running to really demonstrate the impact of donors' gifts to the emergency campaign for community resilience. And first and foremost, we just want to thank you. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Our community in Toronto was really leading the Jewish world in our response to COVID and to this crisis. And all eyes are on us, and people just can't believe how the Toronto Jewish community has stepped up and what we've been able to do and the difference that we've been able to make in the lives of so many in such a short period of time. So really, that's because of what you've done. And so really, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. During today's program, we're going to talk about the impact of the emergency campaign specifically on Jewish education. And we're going to hear details of how the Jewish schools were able to pivot, especially early on in the pandemic, to online learning and things like that. And also how schools have been diligently planning to reopen this week and what that's been like. And also UJA Federation's plan for long-term sustainability of the Jewish day school system. We're going to have time for questions. Please, if you see the chat box at the bottom of your screen, you can fill in or type in questions at any time there throughout the presentation. We're happy to address all the questions at the end, but please, type them when they come up so we know to address them once we've concluded sort of the formal portion of our program. And the other thing I would ask is if you can right-click on your little Zoom square, you could change your name to actually show us who you are, so we know that you're on the call. And if you have any questions, we know who they're coming from. That would be fantastic if you could do that and just change your name briefly while you have a moment before we get started. Tonight, we're going to hear from Dan Held, who is our Executive Director of the Koshitsky Center for Jewish Education at UJA, and also Adam Minsky, who I think all of you know, and if you don't, our CEO, who are going to speak. And then we're also going to, at the end, have quite a bit of time, as I said, for questions. So hopefully an interactive program. Before we get started, I wanted to just mention one thing. I think, as many of you know, UJA provides support for schools in multiple ways, through interest-free loans with the Jewish Free Loan Toronto, through emergency grants, and through our regular tuition assistance programs. And we have a video actually from a parent that we recently met. She's a single mom, she's a dentist, and she's a day school parent. She was hit particularly hard during the pandemic and has really, really been struggling. And she received support actually that has allowed her to keep her kids in Jewish day school, and was so touched by the support that she received that she said, if and when she gets back on her feet, she just wants to make sure that she can pay it forward. So I want us to take a moment to take a look at this clip and her story before we get started today.
Boy. They are 10 years old. They are entering grade 5 at Bialik Hebrew Day School. We chose Jewish education. It was very important for us for our children to have a Jewish identity. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. I wanted my children to know where they came from and to know how important it is to be Jew. And I attended day school, and their dad attended day school, and so far our children have excelled and are just loving Bialik. We were fortunate enough to, of course, be able to afford to send the children to Bialik. I work full time, and I had never thought that I would be faced with a pandemic. With dentistry, our overhead is so high that when we were told by our Royal College March 16th, 2020, that we could no longer go to work, my whole life changed. Everything changed for myself, for my family. The bills added up, and I have investments that I have been saving for my retirement that we had no choice but to dip into. I was struck with such a fear that not only would I have to sell my house, where would I be living? I didn't know how long this pandemic was going to go on for. I thought dentistry, for what we knew of it, was done. Doing public school was not an option at all for me, for my kids. I think it would tear them apart. I think it would just be heart-wrenching if I had to pull them away from their best friends and their comfort zone and a place they call home. Bialik is a home for them. I actually never thought that there would be any support available, and borrowing the money from the bank was not an option for me. So I was so relieved when I received the email from Bialik. It was very simple. There was no financial audit involved, other than a couple pieces of paper to show our identity and what our income was currently, which for most of the world was zero at the time. And it just was such a sigh of relief. It was so, it really just showed how strong our community is and how we all look out for one another. And again, I cannot thank UJA and the Bialik community enough for everything that they did. The ease and the comfort that I felt was, I can't put it into words.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Minsky. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight we're going to be looking at numbers and impact to really report to you, our donors, about the impact that we've made so far with the emergency campaign for community resilience. But when you hear from someone like Jessica, the parent who was just in the video, what really hits home for me is that numbers alone can't convey the impact that we're making together. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of parents in our Jewish community, like Jessica, who are newly vulnerable. And I'm so grateful to her for being willing to share her powerful message. One of the things that really stuck with me when I just heard the video play is towards the end of her comments. She says, in our community, we all look out for one another, and it should make us all so proud that the message that underpins everything we are doing together with our UJA's emergency campaign for community resilience is being internalized by the people and the families that we're really helping. I think the right place to start for this conversation is last Passover, and to remind you where we were when we launched our emergency campaign not 5 months ago. At the time, we were all shut in to our homes. 44% of the Jewish community and the general community was facing either partial or complete job loss. And we essentially launched our emergency campaign because we saw two existential risks for the future of our community. The first being that we would be overwhelmed by newly vulnerable Jews, and that thousands of children and teens would have to withdraw from the key Jewish experiences that cement their Jewish identity. And so our campaign had two very simple and clear messages. We were going to do two things as a community with that emergency campaign that's still underway. We were going to make sure that no Jew would be turned away from a Jewish social service agency due to a lack of community resources, and that no Jewish child or teen would be disconnected from those essential experiences due to the financial crisis. In both cases, we understood that if we didn't intervene as a community, the long-term implications would be dire. If we had thousands of newly impoverished Jews in our community, if we weren't able to get them back on their feet, they would need the support of the community for a lifetime. And similarly, if we disconnected our young people from Jewish experiences and they stopped participating, thousands of young people no longer participating in our schools, day school, supplementary camps, the rest of it, these organizations would simply shut down because those people are the core of those organizations. And so intervening in the way we did was a very, very powerful thing for our community to do. And I'm enormously proud of that strong statement we made. Now, the first imperative of the campaign, helping the Jewish vulnerable, will be the subject of a future briefing. I want to focus tonight on the second priority, which was how do we keep Jews connected to those essential experiences in our community, such as day school, part-time Jewish education, summer camp, JCC programs. And tonight in particular, I want to focus on the one where we're already seeing a significant impact, which is on our Jewish day school system. You may ask yourself, why did we focus so intently on the Jewish day school system? The answer is really quite simple. We saw in 2018 the most recent in a series of many research studies that indicated that the exceptional nature of the Toronto Jewish community, its high levels of Jewish identification, of community engagement, of connection to Israel, all stem back to the investment that our community has made in Jewish education, and in particular in our Jewish day school system. The fact that so many young people in our community benefit from a deep and meaningful Jewish day school education has transformed the character of our community in a way that makes us truly, truly exceptional. The main part of this conversation is going to be with Daniel Held, our real expert in Jewish education. I just wanted to share with you three takeaways that for me are at the heart of this conversation. The first is, I never thought I would be in the position to say this. If you would have asked me last Passover when we were launching an emergency campaign, what the scenarios we were contemplating for Jewish day schools were, where we are today is in the most optimistic of those early scenarios. Daniel will give you the numbers in greater detail, but my message to you is we've made incredible progress and we still have a way to go. The unexpected part of where we are is that, and I'll say it slowly because I want to hear it come out of my mouth, for the first time in 17 years, not only have we managed to maintain the previous level of enrollment in the Jewish day school system, but we've actually managed to increase enrollment by 243 students. That's a 5% increase in non-Orthodox Jewish day schools. And when you factor in the Orthodox and non-Orthodox together, we're at about 2 to 3% increase. But, the percentages don't really mean a whole lot to me. What means something very significant to me is the 243 young people whose lives we've changed by having them enter the Jewish day school system who weren't there before, as a result of our unprecedented statement to everybody that you're not going to be turned away from a Jewish day school because you can't afford it right now. Just to be clear about it, 243 students is equivalent to approximately the same number of the total student body at either Heschel or Robbins Hebrew Academy. That's like adding a whole new school into our day school system this year. Looking ahead, when I hear Jessica's story, it was exactly what we were hoping for. Jessica kept her twins at Bialik in the school system, and next year she'll be in a position with her practice reopened to pay full tuition on an ongoing basis. So that one-time investment in Jessica is going to pay dividends over the long term. But I want to be clear that this incredibly positive start represents just the first phase in the support for the day school system, and that as government supports are withdrawn from people who have been affected by the pandemic, we're still going to be in over the next couple years for some intense work to make sure that our system remains strong. The second key message that I really want to impart to you is that, we said at the beginning of this emergency campaign that our goal wasn't a community restoration project, it was a community renovation project. And what we understood in that was that it was an opportunity to experiment in a way that we have wanted to for many years. One of the things that really defines the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on Canadian society and on our community in particular is that COVID-19 seems to know how to exploit really the weaknesses in Canadian society as a whole and the weaknesses in the Jewish community. And one of those weaknesses that we really had our eye on was the vulnerability of the middle class when it came to being able to afford Jewish education. we were watching year after year middle-class families have to exit the day school system because it was just no longer affordable to them. In order to respond to that, we came up with a really big idea as an organization that we were working on before this pandemic, which was an initiative called the Generations Trust, an idea that we were going to build a $200 million endowment where the principal of that endowment was going to spin off enough money each year to be able to make sure that all middle-income families would be able to remain within the Jewish day school system. The emergency campaign provided us with an opportunity to test that premise system-wide. Interestingly, the emergency campaign investment in the day schools this year is similar to what we would have put into the day school system if we were operationalizing the Generations Trust. And to see that with a one-time investment at that level, we were able to increase the number of students in the system by 243 kids tells me that if we are able to get the Generations Trust off the ground and we're able to raise the $200 million that we need, we're going to be in a position that year after year, we're going to see the kind of growth that we're seeing this year. The third point, my final point too, is that what we have learned in the Jewish education system, we are translating to all Jewish education programs. So we've experimented with interest-free loans to help keep parents in the system. That's going to be done with Jewish supplementary schools and overnight camps. We've come up with a simplified online form so that it's much easier for people to apply for these kind of grants with the same degree of rigor as existed before, but much simpler from a technology perspective. All of that isn't going to be limited to the Jewish day schools. It's going to be translated throughout the system. And as we get into the months ahead, you're going to see it roll out with camping and supplementary schools. We wouldn't be able to do any of this without your support, without your philanthropic leadership. And on behalf of everyone at UJA, I just wanted to say thank you to you and how much we appreciate it. We have played not just an important role in helping people maintain their presence and grow the presence in Jewish education. We have done this in communities across North America because time and time again, other Jewish federations have looked at the model of what we did with our emergency campaign and are replicating it. I could never imagine, when I think back to Passover, when our entire city was shut down, that we would be having a call today talking about enrollment growth. It really would have been something that was just beyond the pale at the time. And you know, for a year like 2020, which has brought us so many difficult surprises, I wanted to make sure that you heard this really positive surprise as we head into the new year. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce someone who can give you a lot more detail behind what's been happening, our expert in Jewish education that's truly an expert continentally in this field. It's my friend and colleague, Dr. Daniel Held.
Thanks, Adam. It is really just such a pleasure to be here this evening. I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, Ariel and I were both finishing what we were doing in New York. She was finishing her fellowship and I was finishing her, she was finishing her fellowship, I was finishing my doctorate. And we were deciding where to move. And we were looking at opportunities in different cities across North America. And we decided to come back to Toronto, not only because Adam told us we should come back to Toronto, not only because my parents were here, but also because of what we knew about the community, what we saw in terms of the strength of the day schools, what we saw in terms of the strength of the Federation, and what we saw in terms of like the strength of the way that we view the future. And I think what we've seen in this emergency campaign of people really jumping in to invest in the most important things for our community is the kind of reason that we are here, that we decided to come back to this community and make it a place where we would live and we would raise our kids. The day school story around the pandemic really starts, or really reaches its height around March 12th. Before that, our schools had been planning for what to do, had been putting in new protocols and new procedures in terms of hand washing, distancing, things like that. But on the afternoon of Thursday, March 12th, we gathered all the heads of school for the last in-person meeting I've been to. And we started talking about the next number of weeks. In that evening, the heads of school we gathered together with the heads of school and the presidents of the day schools. And that evening made a decision together to pause on in-person learning and shift to distance learning, something none of us had ever done before. There is so much to be said about what's happened in the last 6 months, and really Shabbat will be 6 months since March 12th. There's so much to say about what's happened in the last 6 months, and I'm happy to talk about all of it. What I really want to focus on is the way that we've supported schools through the emergency campaign, and specifically the area of affordability and sustainability. Let me start with making sure that we don't bury the lead, which is what Adam said. For the last 17 years, enrollment in Jewish day schools in Toronto has shrunk year over year, usually at a rate of between 3 and 5% every year. We've just been losing kids. Since 2003, that's 17 years. In the last 10 years, between 2009 and 2019, enrollment in our non-Orthodox schools dropped by 20%. That's 717 kids we lost from Jewish day school education between 2009 and 2019. It's not because there are fewer Jewish kids. The age cohorts and the demographics remain relatively stable. It's because in that same period of time, tuition increased by 37%. Fewer and fewer families were able to afford sending their kid to Jewish day school. And that's the challenge that we know we need to confront, not just this year, but on an ongoing way. We cannot be in a situation where that 17-year trend continues. And we started working on that, but really the emergency campaign, and I'll say more about it in a moment, allowed us to put a strong line in the sand. And what we're seeing this year is an increase in our non-Orthodox schools of 243 kids. It's just an incredible number. That's 5% of the non-Orthodox schools, about 2 to 3% across the board. It's really an incredible story. And there are two things that lie behind that. The first is perceived value. Our schools did an incredible job between March and June. Not only were they able to offer a continuity of education, making sure that kids can continue learning as they're supposed to learn, but also ushering kids through those very difficult times, ensuring that they continue to be in regular conversation and together with their teachers and their friends, helped not only kids' education, but also their well-being and their resilience. This was critical in moments of isolation to be able to have friends and have a community with whom you're learning together. It was just critical for kids. I don't want to underplay. I mean, I had 2 kids in day school last year, in the spring, 3 now. I don't want to underplay how difficult it was for parents who are now juggling their jobs and distance learning. But what the schools were able to do was really just incredible. And it wasn't just about school. It wasn't just about the regular learning, reading, writing, arithmetic. It was also about everything else that the schools did. They continued their extracurricular activities like talent show. They continued Grandparents' Day. They celebrated Pesach and Shavuot and Yom Ha'atzmaut. What they did for graduations was unbelievable. I remember in the month of June, I would, take phone calls, meetings, walking through the neighborhood, and you'd see these signs in homes, in front of their homes, saying a proud Bialik graduate, a proud Leo Beck graduate, a proud B'nai Akiva Schools graduate, a proud Tel Aviv Chat graduate lives here. What they were able to do for those moments that we need to celebrate in school was just incredible. And I think so many people saw that happening and were really impressed. And then we moved into a phase of transitioning to prepare for September and to prepare to open our doors yesterday and today. I have 3 kids who started school yesterday, and to see the smile on their face was just incredible. We now have 100% of our Jewish day schools in Toronto opening in either a full in-person or a hybrid learning model. So 100% of our kids are back in class. That's not the case in Jewish day schools in America. I mean, we're fortunate that our schools have really worked so hard to make this happening. Only about 2/3 of Jewish day schools in America are opening up in any form, like welcoming kids into their buildings in any forms. The rest are all online. I think these 2 things, what the schools did in the spring to transition from in-class learning to distance learning, and what the schools have done now to be able to reopen, has just done wonders for the perceived value of the school. And families are saying, hey, this is the kind of education I want for my kids, not only because it gives them a stellar Jewish and general studies education, but also because I know the schools themselves can continue to usher and nurture kids through these difficult times. So during this time, while the schools were working their magic educationally, and we were working with them so closely to be able to reopen and plan for reopening, we also realized that the financial crisis wrought by COVID was creating a really difficult challenge for so many families, like the family we saw at the beginning. That families who had lost their job or taken a reduction of income would simply not be able to afford Jewish day school. The parallel, I would say, is that during the Great Depression, enrollment in Jewish schools in New York dropped by 22%, and in Chicago dropped by 16%. We knew that if we were to lose those families today, the long-term impact, not only on those kids, but also on the schools and on the community, would be devastating. 48% of kids in our Jewish day schools are what we call middle-income families. They are the ones who are vulnerable, whose parents are piecing it together to be able to afford school on an annual basis. But when something like COVID strikes, they simply aren't able to do it. If we lose those middle-income families today or tomorrow, the schools themselves will lose the vital core, and in many ways will collapse under the weight of not being able to have those kids. So we very quickly worked with the schools to launch 3 affordability programs to be funded by the emergency campaign. We launched a series of interest-free loans to be able to say to families, if you're having a cash crunch right now and can't access capital, we will make sure that you have the dollars that you need in order to pay tuition. The second is emergency scholarships. Scholarships to be able to say, if you paid full tuition last year but can't pay tuition this year, we will help you. And the third is we made significant changes to the tuition assistance program specifically to deal with the crisis of COVID, recognizing that the financial situation that families were finding themselves in today was different than it had been 3, 6, 8 months earlier. To date, we've had incredible uptake of these programs, which are again funded by the emergency campaign. 352 emergency scholarships have been given to children to date. Again, these are families who paid full tuition last year and have suffered significant financial losses due to COVID. About 45 students are receiving interest-free loans to be able to pay for tuition. And more than 2,000 kids are receiving tuition assistance. And what we noted in tuition assistance is that while a family may have been able to pay some amount last year, often that amount was reduced this year because their salary has been reduced, because they lost their job, and we need to give them additional support this year. Is these two things, these special programs, coupled with the perceived value of the schools, that has really allowed them to grow and turn around that 17-year trend. All told, more than 1 in 3 students in our day school system now has support to be able to afford Jewish day schools. More than 2,600 kids this year require support to afford day school tuition. And that's a reality. With tuition at the rates that they are, the needs of families are just significant. We're at an amazing point right now. The emergency campaign has provided supports for school for this year. But we also need to look beyond into the years to come. We know that affordability will continue to be a challenge, both for those who are receiving support today because of COVID, and for many middle-income families who are really stretched so thin in the past. As Adam mentioned, this is a challenge that we've been addressing for the last number of years and developing a plan for. We launched a series of pilot programs, first at RHA and then Associated, and then at Leo Beck. We launched a Tannenbaum Chat Affordability Initiative 4.5 years ago. And we've been gearing up towards the Generations Trust to be able to reach 3 significant goals to ensure that Jewish day schools can have the same impact for the next 100 years as they had for the last 100 years. So the first is around affordability. The last 17 years, we have lost students year over year because families simply cannot afford the tuition cost. It becomes out of reach. We also know that while we were able to help families this year, there's a challenge of the long line of sight. I spoke with a family probably 3 weeks or a month ago who said to me, we want to enroll our kid in day school. This will be the first time that we enroll our kid in day school. We really, really want to do it. And we're so blessed that the community has offered us an emergency scholarship. But what about next year and the year after and the year after that? And we want to enroll our eldest kid in school right now, but we have another kid after that. And they realized that in order to enroll their kids with security, to know that they wouldn't have to pull their kids in the future, they actually needed a long line of sight to keep those kids in school. And unfortunately, it's a family who don't have their kids. Like that child is not in day school this year because the family was looking out over a long period of time. That is clearly a challenge that we have to confront. The second is financial sustainability. Year over year, I said the cost to educate and tuition has gone up at a rate faster than household income and CPI, making it less and less affordable and less sustainable for families in the long run. We simply cannot allow that to continue. And third is clearly evidenced by this year and by what we've been able to learn from this, I'd say, unfortunate experiment that COVID has provided us with, is that educational excellence is paramount. Families want to enroll their kids in schools which they know are good schools, which they believe are schools that are right for their kids and which they would recommend to others. We need to ensure that we are funding schools which meet criteria of educational excellence, which meet on both Jewish studies and general studies, that shape kids to have the kind of Jewish identity we want them to have, and also where families really believe this is the kind of school that they want their kids to be in. We've done incredible things for September 2020. The fact that for the first time in 17 years, we're seeing hundreds of new kids come into our school is a real sea change. And I believe that the momentum behind that is critical. And these kids all came into our schools in like June, July, August, even September, while our schools were mid-planning for opening in a pandemic. It was chaotic this summer. But now we're about to enter a new recruitment season in September, October, November, December, January, February, as families make decisions about school for next year. There is a moment of opportunity to capitalize on the high perceived value of day schools. And if we're able to marry that together with the solutions around affordability, there's potential to really see a sea change in what our schools look like and what the future of our community looks like by ensuring that day schools play a vital role in that. I want to just sort of pause and wrap up by saying, we are in a really strong position because of the emergency campaign. None of this would have happened. We would have seen a dramatic decrease in enrollment if we had not launched these affordability projects because of the emergency campaign. And it's really thanks to every single one of you that this has been able to come to life, that these extra 241 kids are in school, that the speaker from the beginning tells her story. It is because of what we as a community, because of what you as donors have been able to bring to life in our schools. We literally could not have done this without you, and thousands of kids in our community will have a different year than they would have otherwise because of you and the interventions that you helped launch. This is going to be a continuing story, right? I mean, day schools are now open. We are so blessed that our kids are in school. I feel it. I mean, Sarah feels it, Adam feels it. Our kids are in school, and it is an incredible feeling, not only to have them out of the house, but to have them in an environment which is nurturing and educating them. But the story is going to continue to evolve over the coming days and weeks and months as our schools build themselves and rebuild themselves mid-pandemic. We will keep you updated, but we also want to be in regular conversation with you about this as our school system continues to evolve over the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Daniel. And again, thank all of you. I thought before we would go to questions and answers, I just wanted to provide a little bit of an update on where things stand with the emergency campaign right now. Before we do that, just a quick reminder, if you have questions, please send them in the chat. You can send them just to the panelists so I get them, or you could post them for everybody to see. It's totally up to you, but we're happy to take any questions that you may have just in a brief moment. In terms of the emergency campaign, I'm really happy to say that we are now at over $61.3 million, which is actually, the most we've ever raised in an unrestricted annual campaign, which is really exciting because we have so many special one-time gifts that are in. Generally, just for context, at this time of year, we actually have less than about 20 million or less in for the campaign. And so you can see that in a normal year, it's under 20 million. Right now, we're over 60 million. Really, again, just tremendous progress in huge part because of all of your support and what our community has done. Really, we're incredibly lucky to live where we live and to be a part of this community. We've already had more than 6,000 donors to our campaign this year, and about 500 of them are brand new donors who had never given before to UJA and to our campaign. So we expect that these numbers will continue to go up. We're very much in line with our projections to reach our goal. I say that knowing that there are many people who have been giving to us consistently for many years who will not be able to give this year. And it's not going to be easy to finish the campaign. I have confidence that we're on track. But the next 25 million, the next 24 million, I should say, is going to be hard work. It's going to be difficult. And I know that we have so many incredible volunteers and professionals who are working together to help us achieve that goal. And we've come a long way. And we're really proud of what we've done so far. And, you know, we'll just keep going through this period and deliver the relief that people need in our community. So thank you again from all of us. And if you have any questions about fundraising, the campaign so far, emergency campaign, I'm always happy to speak further to anyone who has questions. We do have a couple of questions coming in now for Daniel. I think the first one is, let me just pull it up right here. The first one, Dan, can you tell us a little bit about how people found out about the new emergency relief that was available for families, like people who had never received tuition assistance before?
Great. There are two groups of people. There are those who were in the school who never received assistance before, and there were those who were not in the school. Those who were enrolled in the schools pushed this out really, really hard, and made a very clear value statement to say, we as a community want to ensure that no child is forced to leave Jewish day school today. So the schools, I mean, we help them with the language, push that out really hard to families. The second piece is about recruiting. There was now a new tool in the school's, quiver, a new arrow in the school's quiver to be able to recruit. And there were three ways that we capitalized on that. One is the schools have people who apply to school, who inquire about school but don't apply. They come to an open house, they send an email, and more often than not, the reason they don't apply is because they struggle to afford it. So the schools first reached out to those families and said, hey, this might be the opportunity for you to bring your kids into school and be part of our community. So that's one. Second is that we as Federation have a pretty big pulpit. We have the desk of Adam Minsky and the snapshot, and we have social media and all kinds of things that I don't know about. And we have a phenomenal marketing department that can push these things out. So the second thing is that we pushed it out. And the third is a critical piece about Jewish day school recruitment is word of mouth. 65% of applicants, 65% of inquiries to Jewish day school across the board come through word of mouth. And we've been working with the schools to develop parent ambassadors who go out there and spread the word. Normally, I would say on hockey rinks and soccer fields and gymnastics waiting areas. That wasn't the case between March and today. But the parent ambassadors were out there really promoting this to be able to spread the word about the scholarships and about enrollment in schools.
Thanks. And Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about just the capacity of the schools, where they're at? I mean, if there are spaces available for other children who want to get in, there's been a change in the way some people are feeling given what's going on out there.
Right. So I'd say, look, I mean, over the last 10 years, we've lost more than 700 kids from our non-Orthodox day schools, right? I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but those spaces are waiting to be filled. We've also contracted the system in terms of physical space to be able to meet that. But I'd say, in the middle of the summer, I'm sure many of you received an email as we were talking about space needs in our schools when we thought that we would have to space kids out in different ways because of government regulations. The response from the community was incredible, and our JCCs and our shuls raised their hand and said, hey, we have space. So halavai, we should get to the point where we need to expand our schools in a way that we utilize those spaces for the purpose of new kids coming into school. But in the meantime, we're heading into, these applicants who came into school now, these extra 240 kids came in, in July, August, September, as we were like really in the crunch of opening schools. As we head into the recruitment season, to be able to see the increase in recruitment in November, December, January will give us plenty of time to be able to plan for the expansion in a thoughtful, controlled way.
I have a couple of questions here on chat, but one of them actually goes nicely after that, which is just, I guess start by telling us a little bit about what's been happening at chat. How's their transition back been? And has there been an uptick also in enrollment at chat?
So has there been an uptick? Yes. Last year, chat had 1,008 kids enrolled in the school. This year, they gave me a round number, which I think will be higher, which is 1,100 kids. So they're seeing an increase of more than 9%. It's phenomenal. But the chat story isn't just a story of this year. It's not just a pandemic story. 4.5 years ago, we launched the Tannenbaum Chat Affordability Initiative, which, thanks to incredible generosity from donors and a really solid strategy from the school, dropped tuition from $28,000 to $18,500. And we've been working with the school ever since to ensure the sustainability for that program. And they now have a financial plan going out another 4 years. 4 years ago, when we launched the program, there were 175 kids enrolled in grade 9 at Tannenbaum Chat. Today, there are 320 kids enrolled in grade 9 at Tannenbaum Chat. I mean, that is just a massive increase that we've never seen in any day school in North America. We're going from 175 kids to 320 kids. And in many ways, like, that was the proof of concept that we needed to deal with the issue of affordability, because the only thing that changed at Tannenbaum Chat in those years was that we made the high school affordable for families by dropping tuition from $28,500 to $18,500. And that difference meant that we could grow enrollment so dramatically. And now we're seeing that it continues to grow, because last year we had 300 kids in grade 9, and now we have 320 kids in grade 9.
Amazing. Thank you. Adam, I have a quick question that's just come in for you, if you can. Thank you. We have somebody who's just asking about other communities across North America. I mean, was our emergency campaign exceptional? Did other communities or other federations do what Toronto did? If you can talk a little bit about where we fit into the sort of the broader landscape, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, one of the most powerful moments for me as CEO was the night we kicked off the emergency campaign here in Toronto. It was such an exhilarating experience we were so isolated in our homes, and feeling the community come together virtually. It was the first time that I had experienced something so intense in a virtual environment. And I sent an email that evening to my colleagues in the large cities and Jewish Federations of North America, the umbrella of all the federations on the continent, to say what was happening in Toronto. And I followed it up the next day by sending out to all of the federations the material that we had produced and the case that we were making to our leadership. And it was the most amazing experience, you know, to see communities across North America literally take the case that we had given them, adjust it to their own, you know, specifics. Most of those communities don't have the number of Jewish day schools that we do, but Jewish education is a priority for them, as is the vulnerable. And use that very clear case that we were going to make sure that no one who was newly vulnerable was going to be turned away from a Jewish social service agency, and we were going to make sure that no child or teen was going to have to leave these core Jewish educational programs. And to see that replicated across North America should give all of us, I mean, the incredible donors on this call, the satisfaction that your gifts to this campaign didn't just unlock all of this amazing stuff that's happening in our day schools and beyond, but also did the same across North America. And it continues. I mean, we're continuing to be asked to speak with different communities so that they can learn from our experience and really do as much good across the continent as possible.
Thanks, Adam. I know it's getting late. I wanted to ask one last question that's come up a couple times tonight. People are wondering about the long-term impact of COVID in this crisis on our day school system in particular. I mean, we've seen the short-term impact. We know that we've been able to do incredible things with the emergency campaign, but what are the long-term effects going to be? Daniel, do you want to take this on?
Yeah, I don't know, right? So I just want to caution that a little bit. You know, I would have said last week, I know pretty well what the first day of school will look like. The second day will be different. But here's my best prediction. 65% of inquiries into Jewish day school come about because of word of mouth. There is a positive feedback loop here. When families love the school and talk about it with others, and others hear about it, they too want to send their kids to school. We saw this with Tannenbaum Chat in the mid-90s. Between 1994 and 2000, the school grew from 600 kids to 1,200 kids. That's because I was in the school at the time and everyone wanted to know. That's because the perceived value of the school was an all-time high, especially relative to the public system, which was really struggling at that point. There was a double cohort where they closed grade 13. There were strikes in the public school system. The school doubled in size. And while it went up and down after that, like, it remained a remarkably large school. And today is at 1,100 kids. And I think there's similar potential here because the perceived value is so high and because parents are talking about it and influencers are talking about it and are sharing the stories of their kids coming home with smiles on their faces and feeling safe with their kids being in school and the incredible experiences they have, singing, not singing, whatever they're doing, right? I think there's potential to really turn the ship in the right direction. But that's going to require not only high perceived value, but also the ability to recruit on the backs of affordability. Because as much as families want it, if they can't afford it, they won't be able to send their kids.
It's a lot to process. It's a lot to think about. I think, again, we as a community should be proud of what our schools have been able to do. And frankly, what our incredible donors have been able to allow our community to achieve in this crisis. We'll end here for tonight. I want to thank you all for joining us so much. And as I said earlier, this is part of a series, at least a 3-part series, where we're going to talk specifically about the impact that you've been making through the Emergency Campaign for Community Resilience. We'll talk about some of the other key areas of our work in subsequent sessions. But thank you again for everything. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of my colleagues at any point. We're always happy to provide more information or to talk to you about any of our areas of work. Have a really good evening, and Shana Tova to you and your family. Thank you.